went through that with you about that incident, and then how we prayed through it, and the Lord cleansed you. And can you tell us a little bit about that and how that popped up in your mind, what you saw? You don't need to go into all the details.
Okay. Not last weekend, weekend before last, we had a pig roast, our annual pig roast. And there's a lot of people there. I'd say well over 100 people, maybe 130 or so. I got brave when I ventured out, invited a couple people from church to come. And the reason why I never did it before is because my father-in-law likes margaritas. So we had a margarita machine there, and there was alcohol there. So anyways, they came out, Fred being one of them. And after the pig roast, I remember, well, let's back up. During the pig roast, there was a kid there that someone had brought. And of all the people there was one kid that stuck out in my mind, because I went upstairs into the loft that we had up there, and I remember him looking. I looked at him, and I instantly felt something was not right, because I instantly felt convicted because I had a margarita in my hand. And I looked at him and I went, this is not good. For whatever reason, because this kid, it was him. It was that kid. I knew I shouldn't have, I was not a good example for him. I don't know anything about him. I don't remember his name. From that point on, all week long, we had so many people there. Tim and Janita could not work the party fast enough. There was so many couples there. And you guys just chatting and chatting and chatting. And just Fred prayed with my father-in-law right there at the pig roast, 80 years old. And so much good things happened. But because of that one thing, I was tormented all week. Just had no peace about anything.
I want to go back, for example, to what we were talking about when you confessed it and how the blood cleansed you, because you knew something was bothering you. There was just something that wasn't right, and it wasn't quite clear. I told you to call me when it crystallized.
Yeah.
And then that crystallized in that incident.
It did.
Yeah. And so really what I want to see here is that when I'm looking at these type of things, I want to go over to Luke chapter 21, because when she tells me about the shadow that's on her heart, that means that God is dealing with something with her, that there's something she's got to deal with. It's unfortunate. For example, to give you a little background, we went through what God does when He rebukes you, when He chastens you, and when He scourges you, when you get weak, when you get sick, you sleep. Over here is an entirely different program when He deals with me with purging or pruning. These come out of chapter 12 of Hebrews. When I go through this prospect, because I sensed when we were talking with her that she was being rebuked, she wasn't at this level. When we get down to the scourging level, God now is taking away many things. He's taking away my job, taking away my family, taking away my house. And if I don't get through these messages as His child, I drop down, and if I come here to the communion table and I'm not going to deal with this, I begin to get weak, I get sick, I can even sleep. Over here, when God is doing something else to take things away from you that have no value anymore. They just don't have any value. There isn't any sin involved. There isn't anything that we're doing wrong. It's just there's a whole new context, because I can't stagnate in Christ. Anytime, for example, I'm not advancing in anything I'm doing, I begin to stagnate. The minute I begin to stagnate, what happens? I start to become a critic. Stagnant people become critics, and they become complainers. But as God does this pruning in John chapter 15, He begins to take things away that are no longer of any value. Lots of times it takes time for me to grasp the message. Like, what in the world is happening here? So she's a great example of God rebuking her on something and beginning to take it away. When the chastening gets more intense, the scourging gets really, really tough. And if I don't get the message, then other things begin to happen until I'm warned that if I don't get the message, I can die over what I'm doing. But there's another word I want to go to this morning. It's in Luke chapter 21. And we really find this very evident today. In verse 24 of chapter 21, it says, They shall fall by the edge of the sword and be led away from all and shall be led away captive into all nations, and Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles shall be fulfilled. There shall be signs in the sun and the moon and the stars, and upon the earth distress of nations, with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring. And I want to go into the word perplexity. I had a situation over the last 2 weeks that I fully entertained and I thought I would get involved in. And as we was dealing with this particular person who had a great amount of talent, I've never met them before. And what they were laying out at the table could have been financially very, very advantageous. And I listened to that, and I had 4 different meetings. Finally, as I began to listen to the person because of the dollars that were involved, I did realize that this person probably didn't know Christ, but I was listening to their talent, and I was really impressed by the talent that they had. But the more I listened, the more I thought, you know what, I don't know. I began to question this. And then there were plans starting to be laid for the advancing into what we were going to do. It says, moreover, buy them as our servant warned, and keeping them there is great reward. Finally, God brought a warning to me in the meeting, because in the meeting, when we got the paperwork to look at the transaction, instantly the game plan had changed. Change in game plan. Plan changed. And it was a significant change. And now I began to say, if I get into this thing, and I'm adding this thing up, Friday early in the morning, I woke up about 3 and I began to intently get involved with the Lord on it. Lord, I need a finalization. I'm not doing business in any of these. But now I'm weighing something that I'm pondering if I get into it. Finally, as I move closer to it, I move in and out of it. I weigh the pros, weighs the cons. But I don't have confidence that this is something that maybe I should do. Now I began to listen and review in my mind the conversations that I heard. I'm beginning to hear something that is egocentric. That was important to me. That, what I'm hearing, is egocentric. Then I'm beginning to put together what I considered to be egocentric and what this person was telling me, to begin to realize that what I was listening to was dealing with their significance. Now as I began to put these two together, I'm pondering this thing about my involvement. I began to realize that if I get in this, that this word, perplexity, when you look up at the definition for it in the dictionary, one of its keys is entanglement. So I'm really weighing this out, and I'm looking for a message from God to give me a finalization to it. I now have the warning signs up on the table as I'm dealing with this person. I'm reaching some conclusions that what is in this person's significance is money. Now I'm realizing another conclusion I can draw. If their significance is money, so is their God. Therefore, I began to reason out that between this person and myself that I could get heavily involved with for who knows how long. If I get involved with it, I'm going to get involved with somebody who has another God. Because what I'm getting involved with, the money is not my significance. Finally, about at the conclusion of this, which was about 3 o'clock in the morning till about 7 in the morning, the Lord put the period on it. He said, be not unequally yoked with unbelievers. That's exactly what he said to me. I went to 2 Corinthians chapter 6, reread it. I know about those scriptures, but I reread it. This time God was speaking directly and deeply into my heart, because he says if you get involved in that, you're going to get involved in entanglement. And the entanglement will involve deep-seated perplexity. And as I deal and talk with people, all the time I'm dealing with people that are entangled. Everybody just about that I know is entangled in something just like Jesus said they would be. So I'm listening. This would have been a multifaceted entanglement. 8 o'clock I made the call and said I'm not in it anymore. I realized that when I pull the plug on it, it's going to affect a large number of people. I thought, now I'll play off the response of my contact to the person I tell so I can hear his response. Will it be volatile? Will it be indifferent? Will it be complacent? What kind of a reaction will I get? I said, very clearly I pondered this. I've reached my conclusion I'm not involved. He said, I understand. Oh, big relief. I don't have to go into a bunch of explanations of why I've reached this conclusion. But from 3 until 7, I was intensely before God because something is not right for me, and it doesn't involve any of these over here at all. It is something that God advances on before I get involved in the pruning stations where he says I don't need that anymore, because the next step, if I get beyond the pruning, he will help me to avoid the perplexities. He says, anybody that you're dealing with that you got a question about, bring that person over to me and I'm going to tell you a lot about him. And let me say, the person that I was involved with over here, whose actions I observed, I didn't hold anything about that person, praying for their salvation. But it became, as those things began to fall, it became such a pattern of clarity to me concerning this person I was dealing with, that the last thing I wanted to do for my own sense of peace and security was not get involved in that. So, anytime that God begins to adjust shadows on the heart, he wants to begin to introduce us to the fact, I can keep you out of these things. Today we're involved with people everywhere we look with tremendous perplexities. And then when we get into them, they're long term. You got involved in perplexity, Tom? Now, I want to go a little more into that word, that perplexity. I use the word difficult, intricate, puzzling, brings suspense, anxiety, and entanglement. And when I say that, you and I never know when we're running into somebody. We just have a sense that that person, whatever that person is bringing to the table, it isn't to be critical of them. That's if I'm going to get involved with that, God is warning me, and if I can't grasp this person, I can take this personality to God and say, help me identify what kind of a person I'm dealing with here. Why? Because if I don't, it moves to another word. And we get an awful lot of people that look pretty good. And let me tell you something. I want to say to this person, I will put everything at their plate that they have more talent, and they're dealing with an awful lot of money. And what that person said, that person can do, but I don't want to get involved with it, because I know once we get involved with it, when there's more money coming in, if the game plan changes before I get involved with that person, once I get involved with them, that person's going to change the game plan again. What will be, it will be that person has an itch that can't be scratched. You see these kind of people, they look good, they smell good, they're talented, they're bringing lots to the table, they can perform like they said, but I want to tell you, they're going to sink me and you. It isn't that they're not going to perform, it's going to be constantly they're knocking me off balance by bringing something new to the table. And once I got something on the table, don't change the game plan, because if you change the game plan, I call your integrity into question. I wouldn't even call this person's integrity into question. My conviction with this person is this person functions this way. This is the format of their mindset. We look at a couple going to get married. Something doesn't play. Well, my granddaughter got married. Marshall and I talked about it. Great guy. We have a consensus of opinion. That guy, what he brings to the table is exactly what you're going to get. I don't have any questions about him. When I walked away from this situation, I did not feel that I could ever explain to the party involved what my conclusions were. But Jesus says we're going to find these periods of time when we come into perplexity. I want to go to consternation. Consternation gives me surprise. When I read what we were, finally we have the papers on what everybody agrees to. I look at the pencil markings on the side and a note. When I got what I got this. What's this all about? It confounds. It stupefies. I'm going into a whole series of reactions with this person that I'm saying now that I've been over here. I'm trying to figure out as I sat there. Have you ever looked at somebody, if you don't ask this question, but they say, where are they coming from? Where is this coming from? Where in the world is this coming from? What's being written on their mind isn't the God I'm involved with. It's another God that deals with this kind of stuff, that keeps everybody off balance. It offers an astonishment. And so when you start to deal with these type of things, we see it every day. It just doesn't end when we're dealing with these situations. Now what happens is when I get in perplexity, what does the perplexity leave me? Now keep in mind, God is helping me in my decision-making process. Everything He deals with me in my relationship with Him, as I consult with Him, He's going to give me information. Now the problem of it is if I don't take the process I'm telling you, I bounce right into it. Bang! Sounds like a great deal where we sign the papers. Now I got myself in something. Now I got the problem. I've got perplexity. And some of you have heard this before. Now what perplexity means is, here's the circle, here's the starting gate. I start here, I go over these round and round until frankly I get mentally and physically exhausted. When I get up in the morning, it walks ahead of me. I go to bed at night, it walks ahead of me. Drive my car, it walks ahead of me. Eat my dinner, it walks ahead of me. But this exhaustion takes place because I can't get a way out. God kept me from getting a way in. Once I get into it, how am I going to get out of it? In 1 Corinthians 10:13, He always guarantees me an exit strategy. In 2 Peter 2:9, He guarantees me an exit strategy. If I'm in something like this, now my prayers going to Him is entirely different. What type of prayer am I beginning to? God, get me out of this. You ever done that? How do I get out of this thing? Let me say that you're really perplexed at this point. You've gone through consternation. You find that there's just not a way to travel out of this thing. Now I have to stop, look, and listen, because if I got into this thing without consulting God, that is, if I need Him. Lots of times I get into these things, they bring me to God. Once I get into them, I may back up and say, where did I get wrong? I say, Lord, where did I get wrong? He says, what? You didn't talk to me about it. Now what happens? Maybe I get weeks with no answer. He says, if you're not talking to me about it, we'll let you stew. Not too long, but long enough. Why does He do that? Because He starts to take the dross off. And so this thing here may go on for weeks, may go on for months, may go on for years. Now, how could I get into that? I entered into a financial deal here. I entered into a marriage. I buy a piece of property. You know what I bought? I bought the sugar. I bought the sizzle. I got into this thing now. God says, you didn't talk to me about it. I said, I don't have enough money to operate in it. He says, I cut it off. If you'd have listened to me, you wouldn't have been in this dimension. Somebody says, I'm going to take on a new partner. God says, you better check with me about your new partner. I said, why would I check? He says, I know everything he thinks in secret. How you like that? The person I'm telling you about, I don't know what their ultimate reasoning is. I don't know. I don't know if the other people that was involved in this are going ahead with it. But I can tell you this, perplexity would be the name of the game. I do a lot of talking. When I get turned over because I don't listen, the minute I stop listening, here's what happens. I can't think right. The Word of God says that, if I can find what the Word of God says, I don't know what I did with it anyway. Got a little. So as I began to reflect on that, I thought very clearly when I was done. Now, here was the evidence at 8:30. 8 o'clock, I made the phone call. 3 to 7, I'm trying to get the period. Here's why I made the phone call. 8:30, it's not on my mind. I'm not thinking about if I should, if I shouldn't, what people think, what people say, what people do. It's gone. Oh, I could have gone out and done a jig. I couldn't thank the God enough that this thing wasn't on my mind at all. It was dead. Wow. This happens all the time. Now, why does this happen? If I take an inventory of the way I think, God is constantly clearing the debris. He constantly is clearing debris and removing things which have no value, but he'll let me go through this to teach me in the future things I don't have to confront again. I learned a lot from that process because I'm involved with several people that I'm helping business-wise. They've got great spirits. We're right on target. None of them in my life have what I confronted in this person. I don't fault that person, but that's the way they think. But what God did, he said, I want to show you something. There's one thing to try to help somebody. There's another thing to get involved in something that you think is going to really line your pocket. He said, I'll let you take a look at that because I want to clear some debris with the way you think. You spend too much time thinking about that. You can't get it because you don't think right. Every day God deals with something that has absolutely no value. And the only way he can do it is take me away through his clearing process. Wow, why do I say that? Job chapter 5 says this. Man that is born of woman, no, that's another story. Man is born into trouble as the sparks fly upward. Job 14 says, man that is born of woman is a few days and full of trouble. Jesus said, in the world you're going to have all kinds of trouble. But be of good cheer, I've overcome it. In John chapter 16, verse 33, that last one. This one is in Job chapter 14, verses 1 through 5. I was speaking over to a group, Friday, of old people. And I said, seeing your days are determined, the number of months are with you. God's appointed your bounds. You can't pass. I said, I want to tell you something about the life you lived if you didn't know it. I said, if you lived what you're entitled to from 70 years forward, you're entitled to 25,550 days. I didn't. And so they all leaned forward, I said, because I want to tell you, I was a youth leader. It says, teach us to number our days and apply our hearts to wisdom. If I've got this many days to begin with, I've gone over by 2,190. God says, you got to learn something to learn how to use these days I give you. If I'm going to get into trouble, and trouble brings perplexity, how in the world am I going to handle it? Now, thought you'd never ask. Go over to 2 Corinthians chapter 4. 2 Corinthians chapter 4. What's the signs of perplexity? I'll give you a few. I live with a man, and he's my husband. I can't understand him. Those I live with. I've got a son and a daughter, a son-in-law and a daughter-in-law. I've got 5 grandkids, and what do we call somebody who marries your granddaughter? Got to turn. I know he's the son, but he's a husband of your granddaughter. Every time I add another person, of which now there are 12. Every one of these people bring a new set of situations. Yes, do you agree? And I look at, I thought, if I want to avoid all of this, you go back and eradicate your husbands, your wives, your... I've got a wife I've never understood, and she agrees with me. We've got a grandson. I've got a situation with a little guy. And now we bring this guy in. So I say, Lord, how do I start praying? Because I've got all these people. I ask God, how do I pray for this guy? His name is Anthony. Okay, that tells you. The complexities of this group are beyond comprehension. If you think you can dope out the future for this gang, you're crazy. And I want to tell you, the older they get, the tougher it gets. Now, if I have employees, for example, I can add them to the mix, and I can add my neighbors. I can add a few others, and by the time I'm done...
You're perplexed.
We went off to Alaska to get... Who's going to give me my next set of... I'll give you an illustration of that. When I was the last house, some time ago. I had a tree in the front yard that, I don't know what kind, but it had berries on it.
Mulberry.
A mulberry. Big, nice looking mulberry tree, and delicious mulberries. And when I cut the grass, there were 10,000 mulberries to the square inch. But part of the tree and the limbs were over the guy's driveway next to me. And so one day I happened to be looking out the window, and I saw this guy next to, and my mulberries had fallen on his drive. And he was out there picking up the mulberries and throwing them in my backyard, like that. I got the feeling that he was upset with my mulberries. Thank you. So what I did, I get my hose, drag it around that side of the house, go over on his side, and I wash off all the mulberries. He comes running out of his household and says, Jennings, he says, your tree is driving me crazy. I said, I got the picture. Wasn't bothering me, but sure bothered him. Now I said, look, what was his name?
Gillen.
I said, yeah, Gillen, never forget the name. I said, hey, Gillen, I said, I'll tell you what, does that mulberry tree bother me? He says, it drives me crazy. I know what he did. You know how that thing works? Every day he gets out, he drives on it, waiting for him to fall on top of his car. So as he drives out, he's waiting, and then he comes out. I think really what he does, he goes out and counts them, especially the spots. So I said, what do you want me to, I said, you want to cut the, yeah, he says, I want to cut those limbs off that tree. It was a beautiful tree. I said, go to it. I want you happy. I came home that night, I grabbed my throat when I looked at my tree. He had disemboweled it. My tree looked like this. He didn't just cut the limbs over his side of the driveway. He cut them onto my side of the yard, almost over to the trunk. And I looked at it and I said, gee whiz, I'm sure glad he got those mulberries. But if I don't do that with that guy, what am I going to have? I'm not going to have anything but grief. And so I said, you whatever you want to do, because he was, as you faces me on the left side, it's going to be nothing but a problem. Every time we see each other. I got one on the right side. All of a sudden, I'm involved with trying to how to figure it out. If I don't go to the one who made these people, I cannot function. Right, Tom?
Right.
Would you have a story you'd like to tell us about a little perplexity with a neighbor?
We have the 5-day clubs last week. The next door neighbor who we've been very close to since we moved in, their 7-year-old boy accepted Christ. And at the end of 5-day clubs that day, as people cleared out, the mother came out and just undressed Jackie up one side and down the other about how inappropriate it was, and that's her job, and that's not the way they do things, and just completely blindsided her. Mm-hmm. So Jackie, just apologized, and we've talked through it a little bit with them, but right now they've expressed a desire to be cordial, but just have no religious discussion of any kind. And so we're praying through that, and clearly it was a spiritual attack on 5-day clubs and the fruit that was being had, and so it's perplexing right now.
Very perplexing.
What's going to happen going forward?
Now what I've got to I've got to go back and take this to God who made those people over there, because it's beyond me. And it may be a long-term thing. But now I can't take anything for granted because I'm here. Actually, aren't you astonished, amazed, the reaction, stupefied by it? See, all of these evidence, that's just the guy's next door neighbor. Yeah. Marriages, business, whatever it is. The government, totally at that level. It says the prudent foreseeth the evil and hideth himself. The simple pass on and are punished. When I go to 2 Corinthians chapter 4, it begins to tell me, starting with verse 8, I'll quote you verse 7. We have this treasure in earthen vessels, that the excellency of the power may be of God and not of us. Treasure. It says we are troubled. There we are, on every side. There's so much trouble today, I don't even have to look around. But it says we are not distressed. It says we are perplexed, but not in despair. If I don't address perplexity, it begins to offer me despair, because I don't know really how I got into it. I really don't know how to get out of it. I'm back on that track again that just winds me down until I can't get out of it. Now, the other class, they're dealing with money, credit cards. the house I bought, my standard of living. They can lead me into these things where God says, no, you know what, you got yourself into it. If you don't talk to me, you are not going to get yourself out of it. Anything I get into, he says, okay, I tried to warn you. Moreover, by them is thy servant warning, keeping his great reward. If you don't get the warning, you get the mess. If I deal with despair, despair is not sin. It's like if you have kids, you try to give them the best counsel you can give them. Why? Because you've been there. You know it's not going to work, but unfortunately, they're not going to learn it until they get into it. Now what do? Daughter. She gets into business. She calls me and asks me if I'm going to invest in it. I said, no, I'm not going to invest in it. That hurt her. Presumption is a brother to perplexity. If you presume something, that some activity you're going to get in a reaction, it probably won't happen. So I said, no, I'm not. I said, I've been in business with one sibling for 30 years. I don't want to deal with my daughter in financial statements. I don't want to know if you're making a profit. I don't want to know. Wish you well. But it hurt her. There was an investor there. In listening to this deal that she was involved in, it sounded pretty good. And I know she'll work, like that's her name of her game. But it doesn't work. Now we've got debt. You see. Now, I'm not going to come to her aid because why? She put herself into that. Only thing that's going to get out of her, take her through this, for her and her learning experience, is the Lord. Is it painful? It's painful. In this life, it takes 9 months for you to birth a child. It takes that long to birth a believer. Blink. You can be born into the kingdom. When I'm born into the kingdom, all of these things begin to take place at various degrees. The interesting thing none of us are born with knowledge. Anything I learn, I got to discover. And the discovery process is pretty tough. So he says, guaranteed, by the way, she is making progress. Things have but the only thing I can do for her is ask God to give me the insights how I can keep her before the Lord in order to work her through her perplexity. She says, I don't know how this happened. It's called the word, that's a surprise. I'll tell you why it was a surprise. Because in her significance, in what makes her tick, in what makes her, this was part of it. This was part of her significance. Candidly, I better not be too candid, son. Shut it off, Mark. I won't say that. Now, I'm trying to put it in the right. Sometimes it's very difficult to listen. But God begins to strip it away when he says, you know what? If you're not going to listen, I'm going to let you get in there. Then he says, you're going to have to come over to me to bail it out. Go ahead.
No.
I have a question. There is a definite difference between the two. That was so interesting about these past two classes. Like with that little story I just told you this morning, it was very clear to me, without a shadow of a doubt, I don't know this kid's story, but I was not setting a good example for him. For whatever reason. I could put that situation in front of 200 people and not feel that way, but I was instantly convicted. But with this stuff you're talking about here, getting into things maybe you shouldn't get into, with the finances and all that, and just whatever the deal may be, sometimes it's not so clear. And why isn't it so clear?
It's not.
It's
So-
not so clear. Like, you'll sit there and you'll pray about something. You'll say, okay, could you please give me a direction? Could you please tell me, shut the door if it's not meant to be, open it if it is. But it's not as convicting as what happened to me.
Let me tell you something, when I'm dealing with him, I'm going to get an answer. Categorically, clear as a bell. The question is, will I wait to listen? Part of anything I'm in is not really the crux of the situation. He said, in your patience you possess your souls. That's a categorically unbelievable statement. You talk to very few people today that have any kind of patience. Number one, if you smell the gold, God knows whether or not you've made your mind up already. The minute that he senses that you've made your mind up, there are no answers coming. And you see this happen all the time. You sense when somebody isn't going to listen.
Fred, your daughter, I don't know if she consulted you before she got into this deal, but I believe scripturally that's what she should have done. She should look to her father for the wisdom that you've already gained. And I believe that's what
I'll tell you where it didn't happen. I'll tell you exactly where it didn't happen. She said, will you invest in this? I said, no. She didn't say why.
Why didn't you volunteer the information?
Because I wasn't asked.
Right.
You know what? Volunteering information, I've learned with siblings, doesn't mean much. It's only when they ask the question that want the information. When somebody said, you called me the other night. You said you wanted to come over and talk to me. I said, come ahead. He wants to talk about something. I don't know what it is, but I'll bet you we can talk about whatever he wants to talk about. If you've had kids any length of time, you tell me how many times you could go to your kid and say, hey, I want to sit down and talk to you. Okay. It's entirely different when they say, hey, Dad, we talk a little bit. That's going to be profitable. I have never found that if I try to address them where I want to sit them down and I want to talk to them, they're going to listen. When they want me to sit down and me to be talked to, I know what? They're going to listen.
There's an interesting thing that I've discovered is that I can go to my grandchildren and I can say, Vincent or Olivia, I sit down and I want to talk to you. They sit down.
Yeah, right.
They want to hear what I
Yeah,
have to
you
say.
want to know why?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because they don't have you in their life every day.
Almost.
They don't have you in your life. Talking to a grandkid of mine is entirely different than talking to my own children. Why? Because we don't see that each other that frequently.
I'm leaving.
There's another reason.
Go ahead.
When they're younger, they have, with all due respect to Marsh and everybody else, they have respect for the gray hair and for your wisdom and what you're going to say. When they get older, they say to themselves, my father, how did they get so dumb? You know, I've got all the answers. So I think there's pride that surfaces within these people. They don't need to go to mom and dad. They've got it all figured out. If you could only understand why I'm going to do this or not do this, you know, I don't get it. Why don't you?
The thing of it is that it's so hard for anybody to sit and listen. When we're talking about God, God doesn't. Several years ago, I had something very intently. Now here, if I really got to get a hold of him, I close the door. Nothing else enters my life. I begin to fast that day. Nothing. I don't want anything interfering with my ability to hear. I don't want the phone interfering. I don't want the radio interfering. I don't want business. I want nothing. Because God doesn't speak loudly. I've never had him holler at me. Wish I could say the same. But anyway, as a result of that, the thing is to hear from God is silence. I went all day on this thing, approaching it from a half a dozen different levels. Maybe this is the entry I'll get. Maybe this. No, I got nothing. Along about 6 o'clock, and this started like 6 o'clock in the morning, along about 6 o'clock that evening, Now, here's another thing. If you read the 139th Psalm, it says that he thinks thoughts toward me that are without number. My problem is that I don't have my antenna up to receive them. We talk about vision in the church. If we don't have our antennas up with God thinking his thoughts toward us, we're never going to get a vision. But because he doesn't deal with us like our earthly parents, he says, I don't know your needs before you ask. He said, I already got the solution. Along about 6 o'clock, the clouds began to sift out a little bit, and I began to get a thin little track to run on, and suddenly I found myself pulling onto the highway. I got it! Now, why didn't I think of that? Why didn't I think of that? Any more that I know that scripture that says, be not unequally yoked with unbelievers. I know that scripture. Why didn't I think of that? I would not go probing into the book to find the answer. I'll tell you why I wouldn't. Because if I would meander back and begin to read something as I page through the book, I don't know if I thought about it. But I want to tell you, when my mind is a blank slate, and my mind is out there to get information, and he says, be not unequally yoked with unbelievers, I had no track on that. It invaded my thought patterns. Now what happens is, because it invaded my thought patterns, it instantly reflects in the way I think about this. I have absorbed what was just said into my grid system. I'm going to act on that. I don't need any more. I got my answer. But I started at 3. I didn't get it till 7. And the other one I was telling you about started at 6 in the morning, didn't get the answer 6 in the evening. After I got the answer, fixed up some chow, had a sandwich, got my answer. Clear as a bell. It is clear as a bell. When I went to the meeting, I was told God had to be the answer to what you just worked out. It was the answer. I know it was the answer. But this doesn't work like quick enchilada, put it in and heat it up in 5 seconds and I'm ready to eat. It doesn't work that way. Most people are not willing to wait. Why? What they do, they rationalize in their mind what the problem is that's closing in on them, and it's going to crush them, because if they don't get the answer, they can deal with it right away. They're finished. God says, I don't work that way. You rationalize the fact that the pressure is closing in on you, and it's going to cause you this kind of collapse and this kind of a problem. God says it doesn't work that way at all. He says, I know how to forestall everything. Says you got a problem come up 8 o'clock in the morning. I know how you're going to meet the problem. I know how you can. Here's another thing people don't ask. It says, ask for favor with somebody. God, I'm going to ask you to advance this now in the person I'm calling because I can't perform. I'm going to ask you to give that person favor with me because you know I'm telling the truth. I'm doing everything I can do and I can't do it. I'm out. I ask him to favor. If he grants me favor and goes ahead of me, that person will be receptive to what I'm going to say to him, and he's going to respond in such a way that he's going to give me what I asked, if I've done my best. Why? Because God knows, first of all, why I'm involved in this thing. When you say, how does it be clear? It says, just sit down and be quiet. He says your strength is to be quiet. Very few people are quiet anymore. Here he says, with perplexity. But he says, without despair. There isn't anybody in here this morning that's going to come in here that won't have some kind of perplexity in life, from the pastor on down. It's guaranteed. It will be with something or somebody. He says we are perplexed but not in despair.
As you look back on this situation that you're talking about, why do you sense, why do you feel that you even first got involved?
Because it struck some vibes in me, I saw it as a great opportunity. For example, I always look for opportunities that can increase my giving. But as I listened, you see, because my God isn't that person's God, it became very clear that there was a great separation in the way we were thinking about this thing. My getting into that didn't involve my significance. I don't need that for 30 seconds. There's no persona in me attached to that. as it became obvious that this thing, and let me say this, God will always deal with your significance, because what he's going to do, he will get to the point where he'll say there are things you no longer need. You couldn't explain to me why you no longer do that, because it wouldn't make sense to me. If you're committing a sin and you're convicted and you no longer commit the sin, that makes sense. I understand why you don't do it anymore. But in this arena, it's an entirely different ballgame in pruning. Here we're dealing with another word, a perplexity, and he gives me the wisdom and discernment. If I am properly related to this, functioning with him on it, he will either let me get in or keep me out of it. Now, let me say this. That was last Friday. Now there's something I don't know about Monday. The whole thing may be brought on back on the table Monday. That person may reflect over the weekend, why did he get out of this? Because I gave that person one of my tracts. I assume they read it. I don't know if they did or not. But if they read that tract, they may say, could you explain to me why what changed your mind? Oh, I could say, you do. They could say, why? Me? What did I do? I see you got the wrong God. What do you mean by that? This may revert back an opportunity for me to lead that person to Christ. You see, all of that is something I don't know, but I do know this. I cut it off. What does he say? He says, if you think that's going to offend you, cut the head of it off. If I'm enamored with it, I will let it manipulate in my mind to stay with the side of it that begins to drag me into it. At 8 o'clock Friday morning, cut it off. Head is gone. Boom! But I don't know the outcome, because you never know what this process is going to take through over the first of the week. God has another program. He's always working through these situations. I can only tell you the story that happened as of now. But he says, you're going to have trouble. You're going to then he says, you're persecuted but not forsaken. Then he says, you're going to be cast down but not destroyed. If any of us don't think that we're going to take these kind of blows, we're idealistic. This is the way that life is. He tells us this, but in every case he gives me an exit strategy. What I have to be looking for is, what is the exit strategy? In this particular case, I got that involved. At least that's the way I've concluded as of time.
They say that hindsight is better than foresight. As you look back on this now, would you have approached it differently when you were initially
Let me tell you
introduced
something.
to this?
And I want to give you an interesting insight. The minute I began to pray about something, I'm always praying for something in the future. Think about that. Because Jesus said, any man having put his shoulder to the plow and looking back is not fit for the kingdom. When I began to pray for that, the minute that I began to ask him about that, we were working in my future. Prayer always involves the future. Why? Because he says, just sufficient for the day is the evil thereof, but if you're going to put it together for your future, I have to have it before God. I got a grandson who went to Paris Island, graduated from high school, went in the Marines. He wrote me a letter. He said, Pop, he said, I'm doing my level best at Ephesians 5:1 and 2 to be the kind of example I should be in this Marine Corps, but he said, it's tough. I'm going to write him back, but I want to give him some insights. The second thing, I want to see what's on his mind. Here's what he says to me. He said, I just read the 46th Psalm. Boy, is it a great song. He says, you ought to tell some of those people you're up there involved with for them to read it too. He gave me some insights into his mindset. That's information that I can begin to use to pray for him. How is God working for me to get some insights to pray into Joe's life? Because I'm not functioning alone on that. Joe's had some perplexing issues. I'm not functioning alone on that. You know why? I don't want your problems. I got enough of my own. I'm not about to involve myself in your life with your problems. But, it says, he that would ask of thee, turn not away. So I say, Lord, should I help him? I asked about something this morning before I got here, not involving anybody in here. And I asked the Lord about it. He said, no. Okay. I didn't have to put any time out. He just said, no, it's better not to do. I said, okay. There are some things I can get quick responses to, some things I have to wait on. I can't go back and the set of tracks that were laid for that person to come in my life, I had no control over. That person came into my life through somebody else. I was introduced and so on and so forth. So I can't focus on that. But as I begin to pray about anybody in here, I begin to pray about the future. Right? Because God begins to, he says, you know what, there's some things over here I'm dealing with. Well, help me to understand in that person's life how that's being dealt with. He says, why don't you take this little thing in your hand and give it to him? Oh, will he receive it? Don't worry about that, I've already got it handled. It isn't something you walk up to say, here, take this. No. Am I right, Tom?
You're right.
See, that's the only way I can function in this thing in anybody else's life or in my own family. You see. So,
The reason I brought that up is as a prophylactic, a preventative type of wisdom that you might share with the rest of us in regards to something that comes up like this, because had you not done what you did, it go before the Lord and so on, you might have been drawn into this.
I would have been.
Okay, so that's why I asked, now that you look back on this situation, initially when this was presented to you, do you feel that you would have or should have done anything differently to avoid the second, third, fourth meeting, so as to not be put between a rock and a hard place and haven't been exercised? Because if that would happen to one of us, we'd have this kind of a situation come upon us. What steps would you recommend be taken before you get so far down the road that you say, well, that looks pretty good, and so there's some notes here on the side, and things change a little bit, but I'm going to go ahead with it. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, let me say
Like
this.
you mentioned, preventative.
But I'm not going to say that because I am not going to say I am going ahead of it. That isn't going to be said unless I say we are going ahead with it. You know why? If I'm going to get involved with him for money, I got to be very careful because I'm using God's money. See, if that man thinks that this is only coming from me, he's got another thought coming, because if he takes this money, he's got a big responsibility before God. I may be writing the check because God's given me the money. Now, before I start to cash out the money, I want to know before God, is it all right with you? Can we move this money on to the next level? He says, all right with me. Go ahead and give it to him.
I think what you said, of all the things that you said, the one thing that stuck out in my mind is, as far as being clear, how you said, God knows if your mind's already made up. That, to me, spoke volumes, because nothing's ever going to be clear if he thinks your mind's already made up.
Absolutely. I've got to realize.
The biggest prevention right there. Have an open mind. Listen.
He knows the thoughts and intents of your heart. Yeah.
Comment to Bill and a question back to you. My comment is as you're saying that, I'm thinking about Jesus said, don't worry about tomorrow. Today has enough problems. So I think sometimes, you have to deal with where you're at today. Fred, I guess referring back to you, the question is, you're imparting a lot of wisdom, and I praise the Lord for that.
Yeah.
Now, you became born again, and you knew all this right away, correct?
I'm sorry, and
you knew you have to do all this right away, correct? How did this come about? How did you learn these things?
how did I?
Learn these things.
Because God says he's going to give you wisdom, not as the world. And keep in mind when I say these things, when I come into the world, everything I come in after that, I discover. I don't learn anything. I begin to discover things. All of a sudden, I find a thing that God begins to introduce to me. For example, one of the things that kills my heart out here is when I hear that there's so much sin involved that affects people's minds and how the devil comes in and attacks them. Everyone has a spiritual spirit that constantly deals with them and pulls them down. The minute I commit an illegal act, God permits the enemy to have legal access to me to begin his accusations. And then we think we've got a mental problem. That's why I went through those other things last week. I don't have a mental problem. That could have been over a period of time, pulled you down. But if I can get her to use the blood of Christ, which is not a theological term with me, it has nothing to do with my theology. I use it frequently Why? Because then somebody can give the testimony that God has cleansed the path, their heart. Unless I can do that, I ask God now to break up the way I think, renew the spirit of your mind. Most people will come in here, don't expect to get anything, or in the church because they bring their traditional mindsets. They come in here, they plop down, they don't expect to think anything, and they don't think God's going to do anything. I know if I can get you each week to ask God to renew the spirit of your mind, when you get up on my, don't let me think the way I did last week, eventually it will take root. But we're dealing with people that constantly are running in the ruts of the road. They never get out of them. They stagnate. Then what? If you stagnate, you instantly start to fall backward. It says, renew it, renew it. He said, when I say renew it, I want that for me because I'm going to face something else this week that I'm not going to be able to understand. He keeps coming into my life and impacting it in these ways that open up things I never dreamed were there. And as I can begin to use them, other people can use them. And we can see people get set free. Guy gets a financial problem, he's in bondage. All he looks at is bankruptcy. He doesn't look for a way out. He's got a marital problem, got a hard heart. How do we soften up a person's hard heart? If I get them to repent, then God can do something in their life. Joe, when we first met, you were in it up to here, right? Listen to this. When I first met Joe, I led Joe to Christ. He was $600,000 in debt.
All right, Joe.
Swimming toward bankruptcy as fast as you could go with one house out there that we're trying, it's got liens all over it, boxed in, am I right?
Yes.
6 months later, you're out of debt.
Oh,
Wow.
See, why? Because God gave the man an exit strategy, and the problems that he faced and the walls that he put up brought him to the point where he had to turn to God and say, well, I'm here, help.
You know what else I noticed? I'm noticing a lot of things today. This is a really good lesson. When you're, I think he already gives you the plan. I mean, the plans. I don't want to call it an instinct, but did you ever get the feeling that if you just listen, we take our abilities to a higher level? Did you ever just look at somebody, just get they call it a feeling about someone or a this or a that? Isn't that kind of, it's almost like he's guiding you to say, okay, take it to another, ask me about this person. Because when you met that guy, I get constantly looking at somebody, you can look in their face, look in their, you just get that, I want to call it an instinct. Doesn't he give you instincts to pursue it further? So the plan's already in motion.
There's a certain intuitive aspect to it, there is.
To what you read in the Word. That's the key, I think.
Well, the key to anything concerning the book is for you to cut your sin, to cut it off. Does it mean I don't sin? It means I don't keep it. Sure, I sin, but because I know the blood will cleanse me, and there will be things that snap into my mind I don't have any control over if I entertain them. So God will keep that. He's the one that keeps the accounts on my relationship with it. That's his job. So if I can keep, for example, one of the things that I wanted to go through, and I didn't get a time to go in, there are 71 aspects to where you fall in a hole. Because we don't have any time to go into it, I'll just mention. If you read chapter 15, in Matthew, Jesus introduces the first 7 things, and here's what they involve. They defilement. What does that mean? That means if you involve yourself in those, you're filthy. If you go on, by the time we conclude that, in 2 Timothy chapter 3, there will be 71 blemishes in your life that you will encounter. Probably some people will encounter all of them. I was reading a biography yesterday. I should go back and buy it. Katie saw me reading it. Of a guy by the name who was involved with Korn. I don't know. It was a musical group. Perverted beyond means, got converted. And when I picked it up, it says, Finding Heaven. I started at that chapter and read to the conclusion of how this demented drug talks about finding God. Then as God began to deal with him, he thought the devil and all that was just laughable. He hadn't been saved long. He's laying on his bed at night, and he goes to bed. He sleeps in 10 minutes. He wakes up, and he's paralyzed. And he's trying to talk. And he says, I'm talking with some kind of voice like the exorcist. He says, what is this? He went back to sleep. Same thing, paralysis. All night long he did that. And this horrible voice he says, this can't be my voice. This guy doesn't know anything spiritually. But as you read through and he goes to get spiritual help, he begins to find that this is a demon. He says, my mind won't even accept those kind of things. Until finally, when he uses the name of Christ, this thing leaves the left, never came back. But he didn't believe any of that. He thought, well, he's ecstatic about getting saved, but then his past life begins to mount up, and the influences that were there to grab him, to pull him down almost and take him into eternal hell. But unless I'm doing these things, my relationship with Christ is here for us to get through this thing. I'm in my apprenticeship, so are you. I've got to get through this thing. He's the only one to get me through it. If I don't do these things, I'm off the wall, bouncing around like a billiard ball. I'm part of the problem. Or I can get out of the problem for a while. You know what? I'm right back in the problem. God says delivery doesn't get you back in it, it gets you out of it. So anyway, so there we go. John, why don't you close?
Heavenly Father,